recording. Good. Very good. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Good. Welcome to all of you watching this. Most lay people will be watching this satsang online, so welcome to you all. But you know that we also have our local New Jersey students here with us, so welcome to you as well. What we'll be doing is alternating between questions from those of you online and questions from our local students. And if you do have a question for next week's satsang, you can email it to me. You can email it to me at SwamiT at arshabodha.org. Make sure you say Satsang Question in the subject line. So, okay, let's get started. And I'll try to, my tendency is to go into sometimes too much detail, which means we don't get to answer as many questions, so I'll try to avoid that a little bit today. First question is from Raja Gopalan, who lives in Chennai. He says, an individual sheds a body when their prarabdha karma is exhausted. We are all born with certain prarabdha karmas, which are said to determine the lifespan. In particular, it's said that your prarabdha karma determines how many breaths you will take in this lifetime. There's a bad joke that goes along with that, and that is, if you practice lots of pranayama and slow down your breathing, you can extend your life a little bit. Anyway, bad joke. But what about cases of like natural disasters, earthquakes, or moral evils, act of terrorism, which can cause mass deaths and cause them suddenly? So the question then that Rajagopalan has is there such a thing as an untimely death? That is, a death that's not determined by prarabdha karma. There are actually at least two different situations here. If mass deaths are due to a natural disaster, like an earthquake, we would say that those deaths are actually the prarabdha of all those who died. Because you cannot, what happens depends on karma. Earthquake is the result of not karma. Earthquake is the result of laws of nature. If there was any karma involved in those deaths at all, it was those people chose to live there. And they may not have known it at the time, but they chose to live at a place that was destined to have destined by the laws of nature to have an earthquake. So in the case of natural disasters, we would say that the people who chose to be in a certain place at a certain time due to their choices that allowed their prarabdha karma, their choice, that's interesting, turn it around. You would say that their choice to live there was connected to their prarabdha karmas, that their lives should end at a particular point in time. But the point here then, the two different, very different situations. Deaths due to natural disasters are considered to be due to the exhaustion of a mass number of people having the karmas come to an end at the same time. Their prarabdhas ended at the same time. It's a coincidence, but we see that natural disasters are not that common, so we can understand the coincidence of all these people having prarabdha karmas that simultaneously come to an end. But don't confuse the situation with willful acts of mass casualties, like acts of terrorism. So when terrorists kill a large number of people, it was not the prarabdha karmas of those people to die. They indeed died untimely deaths, which is what Rajagopalan is asking here. There is such a thing as an untimely death. An untimely death is any situation in which will is used to commit an act of killing someone, which means a terrorist, we say that it's all karma, but not just your karma. The karma of that terrorist. Karma means action, not just past actions. Current actions also count. So the actions of a terrorist could cut short your life, or one might suspect that suicide also is an untimely death, because in suicide you use your own will, and it's your own karma to cut short your life. The point here is karma drives everything, but not just past karmas. We have to think also of our current karmas. Okay, next question. Why did the ancient rishis bother compiling so much additional information on rituals and hymns in the Vedas? Why does Vedanta mostly not concern itself with Vedic scriptures outside of Upanishads, if these scriptures are the core scriptures of Hinduism? So I think this is a question from Patrick. And let's see where Patrick lives. He lives in Grand Junction, Colorado. So Patrick's question probably refers to some discussion we've had about the Vedas having different sections, and most of those sections are dedicated to rituals, performance of rituals, along with prayers that go along with those rituals, along with meditations which go along with those rituals. The Vedas also include the spiritual wisdom of the ancient rishis, the teachings of Vedanta that we study, and those teachings are found in a section called Upanishad. Now, by size, the first part of the Veda, called Karma Kanda, Kanda section, karma here means ritual. In ancient times, the word karma was used for Vedic rituals. So the Karma Kanda of the Veda is huge compared to the Upanishads, which are small. Patrick's question is, why did the rishis bother, so to speak? I'm putting words in his mouth. And the reason is something we've actually discussed before, the uniqueness of the Hindu tradition having this principle of adhikari bheda. Do you remember that term? It means that there's difference among people. Difference of qualification, difference of values, difference in so many ways. And what that amounts to then is for people who want to go to heaven, give them some rituals to do. For people who want moksha, give them some spiritual teachings. So this, I find, is one significant uniqueness of the Hindu tradition. Most religions And you've heard me say this before, one size fits all. So there are certain beliefs, certain rituals, everyone has to do the same thing. The Vedic tradition acknowledges the differences among people and then allows people to, this is important, allows people to choose for themselves. Should I do this ritual? Should I do that ritual? Should I not do any rituals at all and just study Vedanta? What other religion gives you this kind of choice? I think this is absolutely unique. In other religions, you don't get these choices. Which form of God do you worship? In what other religion do you get a choice? So anyway, this is my point. So it's a principle of adhikari, Veda. The teachings of the Vedas are meant to address a wide range of people. Take one more question here. This is Kirti from Bhopal, which is in Madhya Pradesh. He said that we've discussed the subtle body, the sukshma sharira, that lives on after the death of the physical body. And as we've discussed, the sukshma sharira is driven on by the force of karma for the unfructified karmas to eventually be fructified. That sukshma sharira is driven by the laws of nature to assume another physical body so that those karmas can be exhausted. So Kirti asks, is that subtle body avinashi, indestructible, immortal, in the same way as Brahman or Atma is indestructible and immortal? Well, clearly the sukshma sharira is beginningless. And there's a little logic associated with the doctrine of karma, and that is there can be no first birth according to the doctrine of karma. Since birth is due to karma, for a first birth there's no karma to cause that birth. So according to the doctrine of karma, you have had an infinite number of prior births. So we can say that the sukshma sharira in the past was never non-existent. That's the concept of infinity. This little bit, I don't know if when you were a student, if you struggled with the concept of infinity, then you're likely to struggle with it here as well. But we have to come to grips with that. There is a mathematical concept of infinity, and it turns out to be important in Advaita Vedanta and philosophy in general. So, sukshma sharira had no prior condition of non-existence. But and the logicians like these terms, prior non-existence and posterior non-existence. So sukshma sharira has no prior non-existence. Does it necessarily mean it will have no future non-existence? Not according to the doctrine of karma. So the subtle body is driven by the accumulated karmas. Suppose there are no accumulated karmas. If there are no accumulated karmas for that sukshma sharira, there's nothing to drive it. There's no reason for it to become associated with another physical body. So that sukshma sharira escapes the force of karma. That sukshma sharira dissolves. Think of this. Your physical body at death returns to physical elements. Your sukshma sharira at death is driven on by the force of karma, which is why I've called it karmic glue, that holds the sukshma sharira together for the sake of exhausting all these past karmas. But if there are no accumulated karmas, there's no karmic glue. There's nothing to hold the sukshma sharira together after one's physical death. So just as physical body goes back to physical elements, subtle body goes back to subtle elements, and what happens to you in your true essential nature as consciousness? The answer, of course, is nothing at all. Some people feel, wait a minute, you mean I won't exist anymore as an individual? Ever? If that sukshma sharira dissolves, I will never exist as an individual? I would ask, what's so good about individuality? It seems to come with a lot of, what the American expression, comes with a lot of baggage, comes with a lot of difficulty, a lot of struggle. On the other hand, you become free from that accumulation of karma by gaining moksha, enlightenment, liberation. And being liberated, you are not only free from being driven to assume another life, which comes with that baggage, as I just said, but any incarnation creates a sense of separateness. To die without a sukshma sharira removes any possibility of separateness. Which means for the enlightened person who dies, what remains is absolute non-separation from Brahman. Complete immersion, complete identification without anything to interfere. Sukshma sharira could interfere. Stula sharira, very definitely. So the enlightened person is free from that. Okay, let's take a question from inside our hall here. Since we don't have a working microphone, I will repeat your question for those attending the satsang online. So yes, please.
Swami, just a follow-up on the last point. You had said that when there is no karma to propel the sukshma sharira forward, then it can dissolve into the outside. But the way we understand it, the way you've taught it, is that sanchita karma is infinite.
Mm-hmm.
So it's impossible to exhaust the karma. It's just the ownership of the karta is lost.
Mm-hmm.
Is the way you had.
That's correct. So he is asking a technical detail about how the enlightened person becomes free from all that karma. What I said was correct. The enlightened person is free from all that karma. The question is how? How does the enlightened person become free from karma? The enlightened person is one who has gained this highest wisdom, this highest knowledge, Brahma Vidya. And here we have a technical problem in Advaita Vedanta. And that problem is Brahma Vidya, knowledge destroys ignorance. Brahma Vidya destroys ignorance. That didn't sound right. So knowledge destroys ignorance. Brahma Vidya destroys ignorance of Brahman. Question: does knowledge destroy karma? There's no scripture that says it in those terms. So then how can we understand the enlightened person gaining freedom from all of this sanchita karma, the collected past karmas? And I've explained this on a number of occasions with the technical, actually in the, I've gone and checked into this in the commentaries. The commentators give a very, very technical reason. And I think it's so technical, it is unpalatable. In the commentaries, how do they explain how Brahma Vidya destroys, removes all of that prior karma? And what they say is, karanam abhave karyam vinashaha. This is how the commentators explain it. In the absence of a cause, there can be no effect. In the absence, and this is how they explain it, in the absence of a cause, there can be no effect. The cause is the one who committed the karmas. The effect is the karma. So if the one who committed the karmas no longer exists as an individual person, as an ego, as an unenlightened person, that one is gone with enlightenment, so that enlightened person is no longer the agent of karma. And since the enlightened person is no longer the agent of karma, the enlightened person is no longer associated with karma. You're associated with karmas that you do. Are you associated with karmas that you don't do? Right? If someone else has an accident on the road, how does it affect you? You didn't do it, they did it. Or in the case of the enlightened person doesn't do anything at all. The enlightened person ceases to be an agent of action, and for that reason becomes completely disassociated from any past karmas. So we, instead of saying knowledge destroys karmas, that's problematic. We say knowledge destroys the ignorance that causes the agency of committing karmas. And a little technical. Okay. You have a question, please.
Swamiji, according to Jain philosophy, when you exhaust all the karmas, you reach Siddha Swarupa.
Yes.
And Siddha Swarupa is that creative energy, you
Right.
become part of that.
Okay, so you may not have heard.
Like that is very good explanation, because it's a great thing to be able to exhaust all karmas.
Yes.
Now,
Yeah, allow me to respond.
Siddha Swarupa.
Thank you.
Siddha Swarupa is,
Thank you. Thank
the
you.
most pure form, and you become part of
Allow
that
me to
creative
respond.
energy. Okay.
Thank you.
I just
So, yes, I under. So the question for those of who are, oh, thank you. Oh, thank you. I keep forgetting to do that. Please continue to watch that for me. That's helpful, because I forget. So, the question was about in the Jain tradition, it is considered that when you exhaust all of your karmas, then you achieve a condition called Siddha Swarupa, a perfected condition, the condition of the arhats, saints. This is a tradition held by Jains. It's not a position held by Vedanta, and let me explain why. In the Vedantic tradition, part of the Hindu tradition, the understanding of the doctrine of karma is somewhat different. And here, in fact, we've already referred to it. In this Vedantic understanding of the doctrine of karma, we said before, there was no prior non-existence of the subtle body, meaning you've had an infinite number of prior lives. So in an infinite number of prior lives, how much karma has been accumulated? An infinite amount of good and bad karmas has been accumulated in an infinite number of prior lives. The Jain tradition is very dedicated to tapasya, acts of penance for the sake of removing those karmas, for the sake of expiation, exhausting is a better word, exhausting all those karmas. And the reason, the problem from the Vedantic standpoint is how, if you have an infinite amount of accumulated karma as a result of an infinite number of prior lifetimes, how many lifetimes would it take for you to exhaust that infinite accumulation of karma? So by laws of logic, it would take an infinite number of future lives to exhaust an infinite amount of past karmas, which is the reason that particular doctrine is not accepted in Vedanta. You have a follow-up. Please go ahead. Keep it short, please.
No, the way Jain's philosophy explains that once you choose the marg of bhakti and that marg, then all the karmas start dropping off very, very fast. Bad karmas that you have collected, they start
Sure.
dropping off very fast.
Okay. So her follow-up question is, through the Jaina practice of bhakti, those karmas go really fast. Okay? So if you start with, and I apologize in advance, but you're going to get a lesson on mathematics. If you start with infinity and start subtracting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, when will you be done subtracting from infinity? So you say, no, you have to subtract faster. 10, 20, 30, 40, faster. 100, 200, 300, 4, faster. 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, 4 million. When will you exhaust infinity? Even if it's faster, it's still infinite. Which means, even though bhakti, as practiced, may indeed exhaust your bad karmas more quickly, that's a fact, it's still logically impossible to exhaust an infinite amount of karma. That's the understanding of Vedanta. Okay, one more question here.
Just completely switching gears. In the last satsang, there was a question about how to deal with anger. And one of the things you had suggested was you walk away.
Mm-hmm.
I've come across a lot of family, through the generation that sometimes backfires. Because when somebody is angry and you walk away, it makes that anger worse. So just wondering if you had a comment on that.
Okay. I want to see if this camera works. Ha! Good. So, oh wait, that's too far anyway. Okay. So the question came from the back of the hall, which for our online students they can see. Walking. So the question, for those of you who couldn't hear it properly, is when there is a dispute, some angry interaction, generally the best way to address that is to walk away. The question is, in some family situations, there are times when walking away makes the problem worse. Absolutely. So then what to do? Depends on the situation. If walking away makes the problem worse, then don't walk away. But notice both solutions, walking away or remaining in a conversation that you don't want to be in, both of those require a tremendous amount of, we'll use the word titiksha, the ability, just simply patience. Just to patience and acceptance. What is happening right now is happening. You can't do anything about it. If that person you're talking to is heated up and shouting at you, that's a fact that you have to deal with in the best possible way. Best possible way means in a way that contributes to improving the situation and doesn't make the situation worse. Usually the best thing to do is to walk away. That allows the other person to settle down. And by the way, before you walk, you don't just turn your back and slam the door. Obviously that's not very helpful, but it would be more helpful to tell the person, it would be better if we talk about this later today. So you just kind of give some excuse and let's talk about this a little later and then walk away. But if there is a situation in which to walk away for any reason whatsoever would make the problem worse, then you have to accept that reality. The reality that this is a problem that needs to be handled now. So we can't, so if I said it in a dogmatic way, you should always walk away. That doesn't work because every situation is different. We have to do whatever according to the current situation. Any follow-up?
Swamiji, when I hear of these situations, and it's easy for me to suggest what to do, but in that moment when all the emotions are riled up, it's really hard for the person to put it in practice.
Oh yeah.
So that becomes very challenging for all of us.
I'm wondering where that noise is coming from. Okay. Yeah, in both cases, that's what I said, that titiksha, the ability to do what helps instead of doing what you want. Usually we want to do what removes our difficulties, what makes things comfortable for us. We want to lessen our pain, we want to lessen our stress, and that often drives what we do in life. But when you say not easy, I would say without being empowered by these teachings of Advaita Vedanta, it becomes almost impossible when somebody is shouting at you to remain calm inside. For most people, will be almost impossible. That's why we need this Vedanta. And I've told this anecdote before, and that is, this is decades ago, before I was a Swami. I was the manager of one of my guru's ashrams. And as manager, you'd sit there at the desk, and sometimes somebody would come into my office and start shouting at me because there's something wrong. And chances are something I did wrong. So they're shouting at me because I did something wrong. Well, that's the reality of the situation. The reality is I did something wrong. The reality is they're shouting at me. The reality is if I shout back, I make the problem worse. The reality is if I throw them out of my office, I make the problem worse. So the teachings of Vedanta, honestly, without these teachings, I could not have managed that role as manager, because I found it a very difficult role. But with the help of these teachings, I found I was able to remain calm, not perfectly all the time, most of the time, able to remain calm enough to deal with those situations. Okay, let's take some more questions from online. Dheeraj. Dheeraj asks, if I am not mistaken, Maya acts through the will of Brahman. A little odd expression. But Brahman is qualificationless. Brahman is nirguna. Brahman is nirguna, which means having will is a quality. So if Brahman is nirguna, Brahman has no will. So how does it have the ability to will something? Brahman has no will. Brahman, nirguna Brahman, did not create the universe. Then where did all this come from? Not from nirguna Brahman willing the universe into existence, but nirguna Brahman associated with this creative capacity of Maya. Through Maya, the world came into existence. So not through nirguna Brahman, but through this creative capacity of Maya. So nirguna Brahman has no will. Next question here from Daniel. I believe Daniel lives in the Philippines. What's going on here? And just responding to some noise in the sound system. What is the difference between ahankara and jiva? So these words are used in similar contexts, but I'm glad Daniel is asking this question because it's crucial that we understand the meaning of these words properly. Let me, before answering Daniel's questions, let me share with you something I think unique about our particular teaching tradition. And that uniqueness is the extensive use of Sanskrit terminology. The mode of communication is English. In fact, I cannot fluently speak Sanskrit because I don't ordinarily speak it. And if I speak Hindi, you'll laugh. It's pretty bad. But, so our medium of communication is English, but we use a large Sanskrit vocabulary because those Sanskrit terms have a precision that English equivalents do not have. So a word like upadhi, when you translate upadhi as conditioning adjunct, what in the world does that mean? But if we spend a half an hour talking about what is an upadhi, now that word upadhi is filled with a half an hour of information, a half an hour of deeper understanding. So then we can use that word upadhi going forward, having filled it with so much meaning. And that's one of the things my guru thought was extremely important, and that was to use precise Sanskrit terminology and to fill those words with meaning. If you find that the teachings you hear from me seem more clear than what you hear elsewhere, this is probably the reason. It's a style of teaching where we use these technical Sanskrit words and we fill them with meaning. And we have to thank Puja Swami Dayananda for that. That was one thing he really focused on, and to a unique extent, at least in my opinion. Now to come to Daniel's question. Difference between ahankara and jiva. Ahankara, good example, translated as ego. Ego in what sense? Ego is the Latin pronoun I. Ego is pride. Ego is this kind of obnoxiousness when somebody's self-image is overinflated. Ego has so many meanings. We use it in a technical sense, and that technical sense is revealed by the word ahankara itself. Ahankara is aham, the Sanskrit pronoun I, with kara, an affix which means the maker. So ahankara literally means I maker. It means that which gives rise to the sense of individuality, the sense of I-ness. Ahankara is a thought that represents you. It's a self-descriptive, thought is not word, concept. It is when you refer to yourself, that I with your whole life history is that ahankara, sense of individuality, as opposed to jiva. Jiva simply means living being. That's all it means. Jiva is a living being. Okay, next question. It's similar to the previous one. This is from Ramesh in Bangalore. Ramesh asks, as per Advaita Vedanta, Brahman, as nirguna Brahman, is reflected as jivas in all pranis of the cosmos. So a little problem, even Sanskrit words have to be used properly. So let me just add something here. As per Advaita, Brahman, nirguna Brahman, is reflected, and I think he means manifest. So becomes manifest. Nirguna Brahman becomes manifest as jivas. I think he means sukshma sharira, but that's okay. Jivas of pranis. Pranis are living beings. So jiva becomes manifest. Brahman, nirguna Brahman becomes manifest as all jivas, all living beings in the universe. And we already discussed, actually related, but not the same. Nirguna Brahman doesn't do anything, doesn't become manifest as anything. Nirguna Brahman is a non-dual reality that exists even now. As we experience this world of duality, the underlying truth is non-dual. Advaya Brahma, non-dual Brahman, nirguna Brahman, qualityless, attributeless Brahman. So if we're going to talk about jivas, we can't talk about nirguna Brahman in the same sentence. We have to talk about saguna Brahman, which is Brahman accompanied by Maya, or just, we can simply use the term Ishvara. So there's a technical problem with when we talk about nirguna Brahman, we always ask this question: how did the world come from nirguna Brahman? And the answer is, the world didn't come from nirguna Brahman. Nothing can come from nirguna Brahman. Nirguna Brahman is absolute reality, full stop, and nothing more. So, and Ramesh concludes, since nirguna Brahman doesn't do anything, which is correct, how can it reflect as jiva? How can it become manifest as jiva? Nirguna Brahman doesn't. Brahman associated with Maya, which is saguna Brahman. Maya is a guna, quality. Brahman who possesses Maya is saguna Brahman, not nirguna Brahman. The world comes not from saguna Brahman, but from nirguna Brahman. And this is a technical discussion, but it's a common question. Next question from Michael, who lives in Australia. With regard to shravana, manana, and nididhyasana, the main practices of Advaita Vedanta, how much time to spend in each? That's an interesting question. So if I have 2 hours a day for sadhana, how much of that 2 hours should be dedicated to shravana? How much to manana? How much to nididhyasana? Shravana, remember, we define these terms very carefully. Shravana, often mistranslated as listening, it's so much more than that. Shravana is a process of self-inquiry as guided by the scriptures, as taught by one's teacher. That is shravana. Of course, listening is involved, but not just listening. Manana is a process of removing doubts, because when we listen, naturally we have doubts. And nididhyasana is a process of assimilation, in particular, removing habitual identification with your body. So to understand shravana, manana, nididhyasana, this little bit has to be understood. Now, how much of each should we do? It's not should. It's what you need to do. If you ask someone, how much sleep should you get each night? And the answer is, it depends. It depends on you. How much food should you eat each day? Yeah, it depends on you. How, your weight, your metabolism. So there's no should here. It's according to what you need. So what is the role of these three in terms of what we need? Shravana is first and foremost. Absolutely. Because that process of self-inquiry, this is our definition of shravana, once again. The process of self-inquiry, guided by these teachings, as taught by one's guru, that is the process that leads to your personal discovery of your essential nature as Satchidananda Atma. So the discovery of your true nature is a result of shravana. If you have not yet made that discovery, shravana is number one. Now, if listening to your teacher and studying scriptures, if you have some doubts, then manana is important. If you have some doubts. If you have no doubts, you don't need manana, seriously. Manana is a process of removing doubts. A lot of highly technical Vedantic texts are for the sake of this manana. And they go into such minute detail and complicated logical arguments. And you might think, oh, what a headache. Do I have to go through all of that to get enlightened? No. If you don't have those doubts, then, then you don't need it. That's the whole point. And then nididhyasana is for the sake, as I said, the best way of understanding nididhyasana. We call it a process of assimilation, Vedantic meditation, but ultimately it's for the sake of removing habitual identification with your body. More to it than that, but that we'll say that's the primary. So if you have no identification with your body, you don't need nididhyasana. But there are very few people who would say, I have no identification with my body, in which case nididhyasana is indeed required. This is a question from Maya, who lives in Singapore. She asks, really interesting question. She has a question about cloning. You know that modern technology, in modern genetics, they're able to clone you clone an embryo? Is that how it works? Yeah? So an embryo, which is a living being in a one-cell form, is then cloned. So now you have two embryos, which can grow up to become two individuals. You might remember, and Maya makes a reference to, I think 10, 20 years ago, the first successful cloning of, was it a sheep? Dolly the sheep. So Dolly was cloned. Now the question is, according to the doctrine of karma, every living being has a sukshma sharira. So attached to that embryo, at the moment of conception, the embryo is thought to already contain sukshma sharira. This is just kind of an interpretation of the doctrine of karma. Immediately with conception, that embryo is endowed with sukshma sharira. Then the question is, what happens when you clone that embryo? Do you end up with a second sukshma sharira? And the only way I can answer that is, I have no idea whatsoever. Please keep in mind that the doctrine of karma was devised at a time and place where no one thought about cloning. So, and my personal feeling is that the doctrine of karma doesn't lend itself to a lot of detailed scientific inquiry. The doctrine of karma is not a scientific doctrine. It can't be proved, it can't be disproved. So when we introduce this doctrine of karma and modern science of cloning, I think it just doesn't work very well. Okay, this is a question from Jayant. Jayant lives in Chhattisgarh, Raipur. This Chhattisgarh. Is that the new? That's a state, right? Yeah. Okay. So he lives in Raipur. Question about titiksha, which we talked about before. This titiksha, usually translated forbearance, being able to calmly tolerate a situation. This Jayant says, this virtue is indeed one of the most important. However, if we imagine, what is going on here? Sorry for, I think I'm going to replace this microphone. Okay. Anyway, hard. No. That interference is correct. So this is a wireless microphone, and so what you're hearing right now is absolutely. Let me just, pardon me for interrupting. Obviously, when you look for something, it goes away, right? So I'm looking at the wireless receiver. Okay, but that was absolutely interference. Okay. So maybe the microphone is okay. So this is Jayant's question about titiksha. However, if we imagine a situation in life where one is under attack from a group of terrorists, then should you just... So what is the scope of titiksha? Titiksha means, it's still working out. Titiksha means to, actually, I kind of redefined it a few moments ago, right? So the usual translation is forbearance, but I rephrased it as an ability to accept reality exactly as it is and set your own emotional reactions aside. That's a lot of meaning to load into the word titiksha. If we simply say forbearance, then that's a very shallow meaning. So suppose we fill it, as my guru has said, we fill that word titiksha with meaning, the ability to accept reality exactly as it is without letting your emotions come in the way. How's that? Instead of forbearance, accepting reality on its own terms without letting your emotions come in the way. If that person is shouting at you, if your emotions come in, if you get emotionally involved, you might shout back. If your emotions don't come in the way, you can calmly deal with that situation in whatever way is most helpful. Now, suppose you have this titiksha, as we've just defined, this ability to be calm in any situation and deal with reality as it is. So, terrorists come in, you're facing some terrorists. Does it mean forbearance? You can't use that translation forbearance in that context. You don't put up with terrorists. You have to do what is right without being encumbered by your own emotional reactions. That really is key. Generally, we get caught up in our emotional reactions, which so often leads us to do the wrong thing. But here, in titiksha, properly understood, is the ability to accept reality on its own terms, to not be influenced by your emotions, and to respond to the situation in the best way possible. We'll take one more question here. Brajesh is from Singapore. This is a good question. They're all good questions, but this one I like quite a bit. Consciousness is not a product of matter or mind, as per Advaita Vedanta. This is a big issue. In fact, you had asked some questions about this in a prior class, about the origin of consciousness, and there's lots of neuroscience and new kinds of Western philosophies that are trying to determine, well, what exactly is consciousness? Where does it come from? The majority of neuroscientists are convinced that consciousness comes from your brain somehow, which is logically impossible with our Vedantic definition of consciousness. So they confuse these neuroscientists, and maybe the philosophers, they confuse attention and consciousness. A very easy confusion. Attention is your ability to pay attention to something. Could be paying attention to something outside, could be paying attention to something inside. Of course, we would call that sakshi bhava, the ability to observe something in your own mind. But that ability to turn your attention to various things is a property of your mind. If I ask you, are you paying attention? You know. You're paying attention. I can usually tell. Occasionally there's someone who's, The point I'm making is that attention is a property of your mind, that attention is definitely a product then of your brain's activity, no problem. Our definition of consciousness would be the knownness of the attention. The power of attention is in your subjective experience. So we make this distinction. This is where we differ so much. It'll take me a few minutes to unfold this. The subjective nature of consciousness is first and foremost. Consciousness is present in experience. And experience is always separate from experienced. How many times have we discussed this in Vedanta? There's an objective reality, brain and mind. There is a subjective reality, pure consciousness. And I've actually researched this quite a bit, modern thought on both neuroscience and panpsychism and all these other, several other modern concepts. They don't get it. They really don't. I don't know if maybe some individual philosopher out there has gotten it. I think could be. But in general, they don't. Actually, some of them do get it. We talked in with regard to your question about there's one philosopher who says, what does it feel like to be a bat? And he chose bat because bats see through echolocation, which is so absolutely foreign to the human experience. So we have no idea. What does it feel like to echolocate? We have no way of... That experience of echolocation is subjective. It feels like something. And that feeling is purely subjective, pure subjectivity. Science deals with the objective world. Science is based on observation, is it not? And if science is based on observation, what you observe are things. Subjectivity belongs to the observer, not to the observed. So let me just conclude this and then answer the question. In Advaita Vedanta, let me put it this way. Consciousness, as defined by the ancient rishis, is a kind of pure subjectivity that lies outside the grasp of scientific inquiry. Okay, and I think that's a very important statement and a very true statement. So the question is, this is from Brijesh in Singapore, who asks, suppose in the future science was able to explain how the brain creates consciousness. Suppose. 1,000 years, 100 years from now, 200 years from now, sometime in the future, science is able to explain how brain produces consciousness. Then he says, what would happen to these teachings of the ancient rishis? These thousands of years of wisdom would be wiped out in one stroke by determining that consciousness was produced by the brain. If you understand the logic, there is zero possibility of consciousness being produced by anything. Consciousness cannot be produced. Consciousness is a fundamental reality. Fundamental realities are not produced by anything. Now, the brain produces lots of amazing things. Our minds are an amazing thing created by the brain. That's all fine. And I have no doubt that science will make amazing new discoveries about how brain activity gives rise to certain mental activities. They're going to we'll be startled even in our lifetimes with the new scientific discoveries, just amazing stuff. But if you understand the logic, there is zero logical possibility of showing that consciousness is produced at all. You cannot produce a fundamental reality. Consciousness is such a fundamental reality. You had a question with regard to this.
Yeah, I hope this is not controversial, but there is a magazine called Popular Mechanics. And interestingly, they have an article in it, which is, I don't know how recent it is, and it says that scientists have discovered, maybe, right, that consciousness is a wave. And I don't know if it's real.
This is
I
one,
got it.
okay. So the question, if you didn't hear, is that in popular mechanics, which is not considered, in a world of science, it's not considered a very high level. So an article in popular mechanics says that consciousness is a wave. There is this is an old theory, this is like 10, 20 years ago, that there's a resonant frequency in the neurons, that neurons fire at a certain resonant frequency, and that resonant frequency gives rise to consciousness. It's possible it could give rise to attention, but as I said before, attention is not consciousness. The knownness of mental activities is consciousness, purely subjective and unrelated to any physical or physiological process. So what you're referring to is one of several dozen theories, all of which are not provable. Tell me, how would you prove, just as an interesting aside, how would you prove that this particular process in the brain is the process responsible for consciousness? Okay, how to prove it? Is that, if we destroy it, then unconscious. Well, how do you know it's not no attention? You turn off a part of the brain or mind that causes attention. How would you test it consciousness? How can, in order to prove it, let me be very clear. It's actually quite simple, and this reinforces what I said before about logical impossibility. For science to prove that consciousness is a product of the brain, science will have to measure, observe consciousness. Simple, right? You can't deny that. In order to prove that consciousness is a product of the brain, science has to measure consciousness, detect consciousness. Is that possible? With the definition of the ancient rishis, the consciousness is in the scientist. It's not something out there. Science has no scope to detect or measure consciousness. Okay, one follow-up.
My question is from the Buddhist notions of anatta and shunyata, like emptiness. So they go to the extent that they are not only negating the kind of self that we would call ahankara, probably in Vedanta, but they even say that even consciousness itself is not like fundamental, and the like emptiness is like the mother or father of everything.
Mm-hmm.
So how does this correlate with?
Okay. So the question is, there are some schools of Buddhism that deny the existence of any fundamental reality whatsoever. This is the doctrine of shunyata, which is actually one of 4 major schools of Buddhism, but it's one that's quite well known.
They consider it as the like highest school of Buddhism, and they call like
So the Mahayana Buddhists who ascribe to this theory, naturally they say ours is the highest. And that's quite common. But it is a very profound and serious philosophical inquiry. And it's a big question. So let me respond very briefly, and then I think we'll wrap up our satsang for today. So there are some profound similarities between Buddhism and Advaita Vedanta, in particular showing the mithyatva of existence. Mityatva, falsity. Or better said, nothing in the world is absolutely real. We've discussed this on so many occasions, and we could absolutely say that Buddhism and Advaita Vedanta are in complete agreement on how everything is not as real as it seems to be. Absolute agreement then. But then, having come to that conclusion, then we need to take one more step. Well, actually, we, meaning Advaita Vedanta, needs to make one more step. Notice I'm not going to say, of course, Advaita Vedanta is greatest, better than Buddha. I'm not saying that at all. But there is a big difference between the two traditions. And that is, Buddhism is based on two things: the teachings of Buddha and reasoning. Advaita Vedanta is based on, should we include Anubhava? Yeah, we'll include Anubhava. Teachings of Buddha. Buddhism is based on the teachings of Buddha, reasoning, and Anubhava, experience. And it sounds quite similar to the teachings of Vedanta, which are based on scripture, based on reasoning, and based on Anubhava. But here is where the difference comes. Buddha rejected the authority of the Vedas. In particular, he rejected the authority of the Upanishads, in which sages of ancient times revealed an underlying reality which is not discoverable by ordinary people. The rishis were blessed with some extraordinary kind of intuition that allowed them to determine that there is a fundamental reality because of which the world of appearance exists. And that discovery turned out to be perfectly consistent with everything else the scripture says, perfectly consistent with reasoning, and perfectly consistent with experience. Okay. Buddhism has almost everything except for that particular revelation of an underlying reality called Brahman. They didn't have access to that because they ignored the Upanishads, and Buddha never taught that there was an underlying reality because of which everything exists. So these Buddhists, by the way, came along maybe 1,000 or 1,500 years after Buddha. The Sunyavadins, that particular school of Buddhism, came at a much later time. And based on what they had at their disposal, teachings of Buddha, reasoning, and experience, in the absence of that revelation of the ancient rishis, they did the best they could, basically. So having negated the reality of the world, having shown that the world is empty of an underlying reality, they said there is no underlying reality. And that is a conclusion they were led to make because they didn't have access to that particular insight of the ancient rishis. So it's most scholars will say that Buddhism is trapped, this particular school of Buddhism is trapped by their own logic, and it's only logic. And if you have only logic and no revelation, nothing higher, then you're trapped by that logic. It's also interesting to note that those Sunyavadins, who were very prominent in India, 2nd century and maybe 2nd to 5th centuries. This is a predominant philosophy throughout India in those years. It's gone today, almost completely gone today. And the reason for that is likely that those Buddhists started reading Vedanta. So be realistic. How could, people talk about, and people say wrongly, Shankara defeated the Buddhists. It doesn't work like that. One teacher cannot defeat 500 years of philosophy. It doesn't work like that. But what does happen is later generations of Buddhists started reading Shankara's works and said, hey, this is better than Nagarjuna. Nagarjuna is one of their main teachers. So Nagarjuna says this, Shankara says this. I like what Shankara says more than I like what Nagarjuna says. And that's how Buddhism gradually goes away over a period of centuries. So this is just human nature. What are we drawn to? Or better yet, what is ultimately helpful? Buddhism leaves you with nothing. Advaita Vedanta leaves you with everything. Which would you pursue? Okay, good place to conclude today. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityor Ma Amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat. See you next time.